Hello, my name is Mark, and I thank you so much for coming by today. One of the things that I remember growing up was that when I was drawing, I used to use Mad Magazine as my primary reference for drawing because I was learning and I was just starting out and I didn't really know how to draw. I just enjoyed drawing a lot. And I drew all the time, but my unique voice hadn't emerged yet, wasn't even close to emerging. I was just a kid and I just loved drawing. My older brother, actually, who is not an artist, he used to doodle little cars. He used to like to draw race cars, and they were just very blocky and whatever. But what I found was I would watch him draw, and I would then imitate what he drew. But then I would sort of embellish what he drew later, and I would kind of round out those blocky shapes and make the car have a life of its own and make it more like vibrant and like a car should be. And my brother would see that and he would just be like, wow, that's completely different than what I showed you or what I was drawing. And so from an early age I was influenced by my sibling, which was a great person to have influence me because I could watch him as his artwork changed over the years. And like I said, he wasn't an artist, so he just kind of doodled around and had fun. But where I like to draw and I was becoming an artist, I was able to take my work to a different level than he was able to. So that was good for me. But that also meant I needed something else to inspire me or motivate me. And that was when I started reading Mad Magazine. That was one of my favorite just comic book type magazines, and I read tons of comic books. I read a lot of Charlie Brown and Peanuts. I read a lot of the Japanese stuff that had come out, and of course I read the superhero comic books. And that was what we did as kids. We read a lot of comic books, and my favorite was Mad Magazine because Mad Magazine wasn't like any other comic book. It was funny. It was different, and the artwork in that magazine, if you're not familiar with it, Mad Magazine was a collection of artists who created their own little strips within the magazine or panels or strips or whatever. And for me, having that single kind of resource to flip through weekly or monthly or whatever it came out and just looking at what other people were doing professionally really had a big impact on me. There was a couple of artists, especially Don Martin. My earliest remembrance is that all my work was sort of echoed from Don Martin. Big round eyes, long rounded bodies, arms and legs that were kind of just floppy. Very interesting style, and that's what I wanted to do. But I was also still caught in the Charlie Brown world. I loved the simplicity of the lines. I love the way, Linus would put his elbow up on a brick wall or a stone wall, and it was just sort of a body with an arm in front of it. And it was that kind of stuff that I was like, wow, those are little shortcuts that you learn over your lifetime. You learn little shortcuts in art that you can do when you're drawing. And eventually that led me to Mad Magazine and other different magazines. There was Cracked Magazine and there was a whole bunch of them. And so for me, finding those voices that were already established was huge. And I could look at those and say, okay, that's what I want to do. I want to be like those guys. There was another artist from Mad Magazine, Sergio Aragonés. I'm not sure if I pronounced it right, but he did these little cartoons on the inside strip. They were just little black and white line art drawings. And again, that really had an impact on me. So what happened was for me and my unique voice was that I echoed these artists until I started to develop my own style. And then something happened in the early 80s, maybe late 70s, early 80s. I forget when it came out. It was Garfield, the comic strip Garfield was in the newspapers. And that was a big change for me because it was such a clean, precise way of drawing. And everything was very finely inked in and the details were incredible. If you look at the early Garfield stuff, it was much looser. But as time went on, Jim Davis, the creator of Garfield, got really tight with his drawing, and it was awesome. And I had never really seen anything that tight before, even in Mad Magazine. And so I started to emulate that. My own style, even though I didn't have a style really, the influences came from Mad Magazine. Now I'm being influenced by Jim Davis and Garfield. So all of a sudden that changed. And so on and on it went. And I found that for me, finding a voice was not easy because my voice was actually just a bunch of other people's voices. And it was really hard to find that voice. It took me many, many years. There was a teacher that I had back in art school. Forget what his name was. I think it was Paul. And he taught me to unlearn everything that I had learned about drawing. I could draw what I saw. That was never a problem. So if we sat down and had a still life drawing class, like draw the flowers or draw the set or whatever that you could set up, or vases and flowers and cups and silverware, I could draw that stuff. We had one teacher that he said, "I want you to draw a glass of water." And I remember how challenging that was, but it was not that difficult because it was just translating what I saw into shapes and putting those shapes on paper. So drawing a glass of water and making it look like a glass of water wasn't really that hard for me. A lot of what I did when I was young, my dad used to take me to he was a teacher, he was a science teacher, and he used to take me to summer school, and I would sit in the back room because we didn't have babysitters back then, or childcare back then. So my dad would take me to his work, and while he taught his class, I would sit in his back room and I would draw. And it was only for a couple of hours, like 2 or 3 hours. But I would draw skeletons and animal skulls. And I was drawing these things not thinking much about them. But what it was anatomy. I was learning basic anatomy. And I remember he had this skeleton that just kind of stood in the corner. And I remember specifically that it was so hard to draw ribs because there were so many in such a small space. But that was a foundation of drawing that I didn't really know much about. And later I took other classes and so forth. And by the time I got to art school, the other classes I had taken taught me about lighting and shadow and value and all that. But when I got to art school and I met this teacher, he said, this guy Paul, he said, it's clear that you can draw. It's clear that that's not a problem for you. But you need to learn to unlearn everything you've learned. And you need to start from kind of ground zero, like when you were a kid. And you need to lose the discipline and the control that you had, because it's not getting you anywhere. You're just kind of reiterating the same statement over and over in your work, and you don't have a voice. So you need to unlearn everything and find your new voice. I have a video about that unlearning if you want to go check that out. But the point of that is just that it really changed my perspective. It made me go back and look at how I was drawing and how do I unlearn this? And right here in this drawing, even though I'm sketching it, this is where you can see I was unlearning, because the basic sketch is like very scribbly and it's not formed yet. And that's what I love about the way I work now, is that when I draw a picture, I can kind of sculpt it out. And even though this is just a quick doodle and I'm not doing it for real, it's just for fun and for the video, I'm still applying the same techniques that I always do in my work, which is I try to plan it out first, try to just capture the shape and the composition, and then I deal with the details later. Again, this drawing is just for fun. I'm just creating this this guy playing an electric guitar, just having fun with my drawing. I have some time, so why not? And I enjoy this kind of drawing. It's a sort of stream of conscious. I'm just letting it happen, and there's no rules, no boundaries. And so I'm just having fun. But what about you? What is going on with you? If you're like the students that I used to teach college, and I used to teach high school honors art when I was a substitute teacher. I was a long-term substitute teacher for my friend's class. And I remember teaching honors art kids, and that was probably one of the biggest problems that kids had back then, was trying to find their voice, trying to find their own style. And it wasn't just one kid or two kids. It was almost every single kid in the class. It was very rare that you came across someone who already had an established style that was really unique. And there was a show on at the time. This is probably about, I don't know, 2015, maybe even 2017 or something, that there was a show called Adventure Time. It was a cartoon that was on, I think it was on maybe Cartoon Network or something. And my own kids used to watch this show. I used to watch this show because it was one of the weirdest shows I've ever seen. And I loved it. It was a great show. But even more important than how weird it was the style with which the art was created. It was a very unique style, and I had never seen anything like it before. And what was cool was how the characters could morph and change throughout the show. It was just remarkable. It was a really, if you ever get a chance to look it up, just look up Adventure Time, and you'll see what I mean. The characters were very unique. Nowadays, when I look at that artwork, it's actually kind of cliche, because what happened was when Adventure Time came out, it seems like every kid at that age, or every young person at that time who was watching that show, just mimicked it. They mimicked the art, they copied the art, they created that style. They were able to create it because it was very loose and very fluid feeling. And what I saw was a lot of YouTubers, a lot of young YouTubers that were popping up at the time started drawing in that style. And it was just everywhere. And it was in magazines, it was in, signage in stores and things. The style had become very, very popular. And it's been a long time since a style like that has become popular with both marketing and consumers. It was just everywhere. Like I said, it became cliche and people kind of didn't want to see it anymore. So it started to become overdone and overused. And what happened was I saw a lot of those YouTubers and young people who were posting on social media that had adopted that style. They had to change. They had to fix, kind of get out of that style because it wasn't working anymore. It was great for when they started mimicking it, but then it became kind of like they were just showing the same work that everybody else was showing, and everybody was doing it. I remember I tried it too, and I enjoyed trying to mimic that style, but it was not for me. It was not my voice, and I knew that even when I drew like that. But the characters were really, really cute, and that's what the big thing was, that you could create these cute, sort of animated looking little characters and little creatures and things. And it was that flavor of Adventure Time. And so now fast forward and you don't see that very much anymore. There's still a few people on social media and YouTube that still draw like that, but it's few and far between now. The styles have changed and things are much different now. So again, back to you and what you do. And do you have a unique voice? Do you have something that you want to say with your artwork? And if you do, what do you want to say? And how do you want to say it? Because the point of drawing and the point of creating at all is to communicate. We're communicating a message, a thought, an idea, a joke, anything, whatever it is you want to communicate. You are communicating a statement to people that look at your art. And that statement needs to have a unique voice to make it carry. If we don't have that unique voice, then we don't say anything at all. And that's not what we want to do. We want to be able to speak with our voice, and our voice is our visual medium. And that's the importance of this. And that's not just for doodling. It's not just for social media. It's for professionals. It's for marketing people. It's for advertising. It's even, I mean, you could go back to the 30s and 40s with the propaganda posters and the industrial posters that communicated not just with their style, which they were very stylized, but also with their temperature and their mood. And they communicated very clearly their messages. without any hesitation. You could look at one of those posters and you knew what that was about. One of my favorite posters of all time, not for the content of it, but for the ability to communicate, is the I Want You poster with the Uncle Sam pointing at you. It's a very old image, but it's still fairly popular today. It's that Norman Rockwell style of painting, but it was such an effective poster because you have this kind of unique, crazy looking figure, this guy with his red, white, and blue hat and his red, white, and blue suit with his big white beard, and he's pointing right at you, and he's very serious when he says, I want you. And, can you create a piece that is that effective? I don't know if I could create one that's that effective, but it was a very powerful piece. And there's been a few of those throughout the decades or so forth that have stood out. And that's what having a unique voice can do. So when it comes to us, just the regular folks, we're not creating the Uncle Sam poster here. We're just creating our own artwork. And if we're creating our own artwork, we do still want to have our own voice. But what do you do when you just don't know what your voice is? How do you find that voice? It's a really strange conundrum because you can draw and you like to draw, but yet you don't feel like you have a voice. You don't feel like you have a style. You don't feel like you have a technique that you favor that will get you noticed over somebody else. And of course, looking on social media, you see other people working, and yeah, you see people that may not be that great, but you see so many artists that are better than you. In fact, they are so far ahead of you or me that it makes us want to quit. And that happens all the time with me. I see other people creating artwork that just blows me away. And I look at my own little drawing here of my little guitar guy, and I think this is horrible. This is the worst drawing I've ever done because I look at someone else's work and my work is just not speaking with the same voice that other person has. They have a very clear voice. They have a very unique style, and mine doesn't. But that's not actually true. The point is that you do have a voice. You just need to be able to project it, and you also need to hear your voice. And that's what I want to get into with this video. So out of all this conversation, how do you find your creative voice? And that's probably a question asked by every young artist or beginner or even artists who haven't done it in a while and they're coming back. How do I find my voice, my creative voice? Well, you could step backwards in time and think to yourself, when you were born, you didn't have a voice because you were just born. And until you cried for the first time, you didn't have a voice. It was when you cried that your voice came out. And your parents or your guardians or whoever heard that voice. And that became your unique sound in the world. And that's what happens, is that we project our voice. I recently watched a video on TikTok with a husky puppy. And the title was The Husky Puppy finds his howl for the first time. And it was this little dog, and the person's holding this beautiful little husky puppy. And the puppy's trying so hard to just make a sound, and it's just whimpering. And finally, after all this whimpering and trying to get a voice out, the little puppy begins to howl. And you could tell it just felt good for this puppy. And he kept doing it over and over. And it was really funny. If you have a chance, I mean, I'm not sure where it is, but you might find it on TikTok. But I have 10 suggestions that I can share with you about how to find your creative voice. And that's what I want to get into. And I know we're probably 20 minutes into this video already, but if you've been with me, then these might be worth it for you. So again, here's my 10 suggestions on how to find your creative voice. And this isn't just for beginners. It's for artists who have been trying to find their style for a long time. It's for artists who have become locked into a style and they're not happy with it, or that maybe they like to change it. It's for anyone who's looking for their voice, and maybe you need to change your voice. Maybe you need to change your messaging. So let's get right into these with number one. Practice, practice, practice. If you want to find your voice, then you have to be able to hear your voice. If you look at a recording artist goes in the studio. Now they've been practicing and practicing outside the recording studio, and they finally feel like, okay, I've been practicing for weeks on this song. I've got all the high notes. I know the words. Everything's ready. So they go into the recording studio, well practiced, and they record. And on the first playback, they don't like what they hear. That's pretty much how it goes for recording artists. And I know that because I have recorded a lot of songs. I've worked with a lot of bands, and I was in bands and so forth. And I had such a great time with it. But I remember in those early days just not liking my voice and thinking, this is not, I can't be the one singing that because that doesn't sound like what's in my head. And I think a lot of recording artists go through that. They hear a sound that they don't think matches what they thought they were going to sing. Jimi Hendrix was notorious for hating his voice. John Lennon didn't like his own voice. John Lennon actually would double track his voice because he didn't like it so much. And that's how it is. But through technology and through, his guitar playing for Jimi Hendrix, those artists found their unique voice. Jimi Hendrix could make a guitar sing. John Lennon used technology at the time to make his sound more palatable to his own ears. And that's the thing, is if you practice and practice and practice, then you'll be able to hear your own voice. You'll be able to see your style emerging. You'll be able to see that voice in your drawing. And that's the biggest part of it, is practice, practice, practice. Number two is to experiment and try new things. When we experiment with new things like various mediums, different subject matter, it opens us up to seeing new possibilities and new opportunities. If you're strictly a colored pencil person, then you have no idea what watercolor's like, and vice versa. If you only use watercolor, then you don't know what oil paints are like. So switching gears and trying new things, that's how we find our voice. And it may not be, you may have been using colored pencils your whole life and thought that that was your voice and your style. But then you try watercolors and you practice, 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 and eventually you see, wow, I really like these watercolors. These things are great. So that is another way to find your unique voice. Number three, review the artists you admire most. This is like going back in time and looking through the history of art and finding the artists that you like the most, and not the ones you want to be like, just the ones you admire the most. It might be Picasso. It might be, I don't know, a million other artists, Da Vinci or anybody. And you find that artist and you say, geez, I really like that artist. I want to know more about how they did things and understand their voice and understand their style and techniques. And if you can do that, you can then employ maybe some of their techniques to your own work. For example, just say you like the work of Rembrandt, with his oil paint style. You can actually mimic that style if you want. You can review it and look at it and study it. Picasso is probably a better example for me anyway, because he had such a range of work. His early work when he was just a teenager was very realistic. He would paint scenes of people that were realistic. But then as he got older, he got stuck in a style and didn't want it. His voice needed to change. So he got into cubism. He got into monochromatic painting. He did all kinds of new things just to constantly change his voice until he was happy with it. And that's what we can do too. We can review what other people have done through history, kind of borrow from what's out there, and then employ that in our own artwork. And you might be amazed to see that if you try to draw something cubistic, it might change the way you draw for the rest of your life or paint the rest of your life. Number four, use your own work as a reference. Now, we draw and we draw and we draw and we practice and we practice, and then we kind of put it to the side. What do you do with those drawings? One thing I do recommend is not surrounding yourself with it. Don't frame every piece you have and hang it on the wall, because then you're only exposing yourself to your own artwork. It's really important to hang work around you from other people you admire, kind of like I said before, and let those artists influence you. But when it comes to our own artwork, if we are able to not just put it aside, like take a sketchbook and put it aside or something like that, if we keep that out and we use our own artwork as a reference and say, okay, I like what I did in this piece over here, that was really cool, and try to imitate that, we can find ourselves being influenced by our own artwork. We can identify the recurring themes, the elements, all the things we liked about that other piece we did. We can then borrow from ourselves and put that back into our own art. And it's not that we wouldn't anyway, but there are things in our art that we might have missed before. It could be anything from the way you draw a certain kind of line, whether it's a very slow, intentional line, or whether it's a very loose, scratchy line, or whatever. Doesn't matter. Using your own work as a reference means that you can find the flaws in your own artwork too. So if you're looking at something and you realize the anatomy is kind of wonky, maybe the hand doesn't look right or something, you can then say, okay, I see that. I recognize that in my own work, and I can change that going forward. So that's an important thing, is to use your own work as a reference. Number 5, read, watch, and listen. Read websites. Go to websites and forums that talk about, or that have articles about, finding your style, finding your voice, being original, being creative, whatever it is. Doesn't matter. Read, read, read. I highly encourage people to read books, read whether it's nonfiction books or even fiction, it doesn't matter. If you like children's book illustration, then read children's books. Those are the things to read. I read, about 2 years ago, I read the biography of Mark Rothko, the abstract painter, and I had no idea how he got his start. I had no idea how he found his voice in art. It was because he basically went into a studio one day, liked what everybody was doing, and said, I can do that too. And so he started painting, and he found a unique voice. If you don't know Mark Rothko, I recommend checking out his work. An amazing abstract artist. And also, I recommend watching videos like this one. And there's tons of videos out there. I mean, there's so many videos both on YouTube and TikTok on just how to get your style in order, how to manifest your style, how to bring your style to the forefront, and learn to make that style your voice. Your voice is your signature, by the way. And so when you have a style and that style has a voice, that voice becomes your signature. And people over time will learn to expect that from you. So let's say, for example, you post on Facebook a lot, and you have an audience. Maybe it's 3 friends, maybe it's 300 or 3,000, I don't know. But people will begin to expect the same kind of work. It's continuity. And if you change that dramatically, like let's say, for example, this drawing that I'm doing here, if I do a drawing like this and I keep posting this kind of artwork, and then all of a sudden one day I post a bowl of fruit, people are going to look at that and be like, what's up with the bowl of fruit? I don't get it. Well, that bowl of fruit is because I wanted to change my voice. I wanted to try something different. I wanted to break away from my style for a piece, and this is what I did. And some people might say, wow, that's the best thing you've ever done because it's so different. Other people might say, no, 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 I don't want to see that. I want to see what you normally do. So it's important to remember that the continuity of our work has to be consistent. And there's a lot of videos out there that talk about that. They talk about how to find your style. There's lots of stuff out there, lots of content. I mean, more than you can ever consume in a lifetime, I think, at this point. But so watch videos. And the other thing is to watch social media channels, other people. I love Instagram for the fact that I can follow other artists that I like and that draw in ways that I couldn't even begin to draw like. And there's just too many to name right offhand, but that's a great way also. And the other thing is to listen to podcasts. There's a bunch of podcasts about art and just keeping up with your own work, and it's just really inspiring. And I love listening to some of these podcasts. There is a podcast called Thoughts on Illustration. I think that's what it's called, by a gentleman named Mr. Tom Froese. And I listen to his work all the time. And he's dedicated his podcast to helping inspire illustrators. And he himself is an illustrator. And I just really enjoy it. I've reached out to him and we've communicated back and forth. And he seems like a really good guy. And that's another reason why I keep following him, is because it's just a great listen, I guess you call it. But I enjoy listening to his podcast because he always has such great topics. Another thing, number 6, look for your style. As you experiment and you practice, you will notice that you'll gradually develop a style that reflects your personality and your artistic vision. And that is key. If you notice it, you can work more with that. You can keep developing that. If you don't notice it, if you're noticing that all your work looks the same, it looks boring, it's not really exciting you, it's not what you had in your head, then you need to keep practicing and you need to keep working it and employing those different techniques that I mentioned before until you find that voice. Because if you can look for your style in your work, you can identify it and finally catch it. And when you catch it, that's when you can keep going with it. And again, create that continuity, make the same, not the same piece, but the same style of art over and over. And again, that's what people look for. So if you're planning on selling your work, posting your work, hanging your work, whatever, if you want people to look at it, it has to look like it came from the same person. Otherwise, it will confuse people. So if you have 5 different styles of art, which is great, but you hang them in a show, it's going to look like 5 different people did that artwork. So if you want to be successful with communicating your art to people, you create in the same style. You create with the same voice, and then you'll speak and you'll communicate to your audience with the same voice. Number 7, don't be afraid to change directions. Your style is going to evolve over time. Mine has evolved constantly, and it drives me crazy sometimes because just when I think I've got my style down, all of a sudden, boom, it changes. And I say, geez, this is really frustrating because I was kind of happy doing what I was doing, but now just the way I'm creating, it's forcing me to do this new style. It's like I don't have a choice. And so it can be kind of scary when your familiar voice and your familiar style all of a sudden changes and you've got this new voice and this new style. And even worse, you don't know how to speak in that voice. So at first it seems like gibberish because it's all new and you don't really know how to control it or really direct it. But don't be afraid of that. That's an important point right there, is to not be afraid to change direction, because like a style, it's like cooking. You can master a particular stew. Let's say you make beef stew every week and you've mastered it. You've practiced it. You've cooked it. You've served it. People love it. It's great. But let's just say you decide to add some sage to your dish. You've never used sage in this dish before, and all of a sudden you decide one day, I'm going to add some sage. In fact, I'm going to add some parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, just like the song. It's going to dramatically change the dish, and it's going to dramatically change the voice of your dish, which is your voice. And you're going to say, I really wanted to try something more savory. Well, if that's what you are presenting now is a savory dish, then your audience, the people you're feeding, are going to expect savory from now on. That's what they're going to kind of look to you for. It's like, wow, you are the one who makes us that savory stew every week with the parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. And that's okay, because now they like that. And what will happen is with your artwork, if you change directions, it's usually a gradual change. It's not like it just, today it's harsh lines, tomorrow all of a sudden you're drawing soft, feathery drawings. It's not like that. It doesn't change that quickly. It evolves, and it's a gradual change. And I know for myself that gradual change happens, and I kind of like it. And if you do like it, then you follow that and you lead with that. You create the work based on how you're feeling toward it. And so you can lead yourself into it. It's a really remarkable thing to do, is change directions. So don't be afraid to change directions with your style. It just means you're growing as an artist. And it's probably because you've been practicing so much, you start to develop a tighter way of doing things. And so that will change your direction because now it's tighter. You might even be trying new things, or maybe you're influenced by artists that you admire. Maybe you're using your own work as a reference. Maybe you've been watching videos. But don't be afraid of that change, because that change will come and it's always welcome. It's when the change is detrimental that's the problem. And by that I mean, if you decide to change your style, or your style is changing gradually and it's becoming sloppy or lazy and you don't like that, but you just feel like that's the direction you're going, you have control over which direction to go in. So if you see it going toward a negative result, you can veer it back to where it should be successful. So again, don't be afraid to change directions. Even if it's going not so well, you can always change it back. It's kind of like hopping on a train, taking a ride and saying, I don't want to go this direction. You hop off, you get back on another train, you come back. And that's about changing directions. Number 8, remember, it's the process, not the final result. We have to enjoy the journey of creating art and allowing our voice to emerge naturally. We can't force a voice out of us. If we force it, it's going to sound forced. It's going to look forced. Our work is going to look forced, and we don't want that, because forced work usually is too strong, or it's too cliche, or it's too something where nobody's going to want to really look at it because it's too much. It's forced on us. And I'm trying to think of a good example of that. Some of Salvador Dali's work, as much as I love Salvador Dali's work, some of the stuff that he did that most people have never seen before, it just seemed forced. Like he was trying too hard to be weird, and it just didn't work the way other paintings did. You look at things like Persistence of Memory, which is the melting clocks. That is just such a unique voice that it immediately, you see that painting and you say, that's Dali. That's right. That's what he's all about right there. But then you see other paintings that he did and you say, that just looks weird. It just doesn't look right. And I remember visiting the Salvador Dali Museum when I was in Montmartre in Paris. And I got to see a ton of his sculptures, his set designs, his paintings. And it was an amazing adventure to see the work of Salvador Dali. But I did see a lot of work that you could see was kind of forced. It just looked like he had to paint something for a commission or whatever. And it didn't have that Dali feel. It didn't have that Dali passion. It just kind of looked, okay, it's Dali, but it's not, I'm not excited about it. So I think when we forget that it's the journey of creating our work, and that we're just, we're enjoying this roller coaster ride of our artwork. It's always going to be up and down, up and down. But if we try to go right to the final result, that's when things get difficult, because we're not enjoying the process. And that's what happened to me with my career too, with graphic design. I was a graphic designer for a long time, and I kind of burned out on it, and I just wasn't enjoying the process anymore. And everything was right to the final point. We're selling a product, we're selling a service. Here's the brochure, here's the poster. Let's create these posters, and everything had a deadline. So for me, I wasn't enjoying that rush. Deadline is now. We're a day late and $1 short. It just wasn't fun. And so for me, that's why I got out of the professional design realm after many, many years, and just said, hey, I want to do something different. And now when I create art like this little guitar guy, it's for me. And I just enjoy the process. Even if it's not great, even if it doesn't come out the way I wanted it to, I still really enjoy that process, and that's the most important thing to me. Number 9, try to mimic other artists. And this is what I was talking about before with the Adventure Time discussion there. Mimicking other artists, it helps us understand many facets of how we work, and it will help improve our technique. So, yeah, we can talk about going back and looking through history at other artists like Picasso or whatever. But look, I think the best way to say is look toward your contemporaries. Look at people who are creating now. Look at people on social media. Look at the big name artists that are out there now. There's books and websites. You can do a Google search right now for the top 10 artists in the world in 2025, and you'll get a list of people. It doesn't matter who they are or what they're from. If you like their work, try to mimic that work. And it's really hard. You'll find it's really hard. One of the things that I do is when I see something on Instagram, a piece of artwork that someone has created that really catches my attention, I really like it, I take a screenshot of that picture on my phone, and then I have an album that I slide it into just for inspiration. And so I don't always look at that artwork. I'm not constantly going back to it. But every now and then I'll go into that photo album, the inspiration photo album, and I will look through all the pictures that I saved. And I'll see one that's like, geez, I really like this one. And what I'll do is I will take that piece and I will try to mimic it. And I will do it in my own style, in my own voice. And it really helps me understand what that other artist was trying to say with their art. I get to kind of tap into their voice and then repeat what they said. It's like a cover song. I get to sing their song, but with my voice. And that's why I say try to mimic other artists. Especially if you are experiencing a creative block, mimicking other artists is a great way to sort of help get through that creative block. And it helps, like I said, it helps improve our own technique, our style, and how we use our tools, because maybe their technique is a little different. I love to mimic other people. I think it's great. I don't copy their work. I don't pretend that their work is mine. I always give credit to it, but I do really enjoy mimicking other artists because it's just fun to do sometimes. Number 10, appreciate the work you create. A lot of artists, especially younger artists, get frustrated with a new piece right at the beginning. They start drawing and they say, nope, this is wrong, and they throw it away. I saw this in the high school classroom when I was teaching because kids just don't understand that you need to work through a piece before you toss it. I had one student who would start a drawing and then erase everything. And then he'd draw it again and erase everything. It wasn't coming out the way that this student wanted. And it bothered me to see somebody struggling so much. And I said, why don't you just leave it and just draw around what you drew? Leave the lines there. Don't erase everything. Just keep drawing over it. Because you can always start another one. You can always, recreate the piece on another piece of paper. You don't have to just draw a line here and there and get upset with it and say, I don't like it, and then throw it away. It's a waste of paper, and it's a pain to keep erasing stuff. So just keep working through the piece that you're working on. Use it as practice. Just carve it out. Make a sculpture out of it. Michelangelo did not create David or his famous sculptures by chipping away at a stone, and when it didn't go his way, he just, I quit. I'm going to work on a new stone now. No, they start with their project, they chip away, and when things aren't going right, they find a way to work it into their piece. And that's with every artist. Successful artists always find a way of working in the mistakes, working in the little changes and the little details. And that's what we have to do, is we have to appreciate the work we create, even if it's not going in the direction we want, even if it's not the result we had in mind. I remember reading this thing about the band Aerosmith, where they were recording one of their songs. I think it was Sweet Emotion. And the singer, Steven Tyler, was playing this mouthpiece thing to get this sound effect. And he dropped it on the floor. and you can hear it in the song. They left it in there. Led Zeppelin had a song where they were recording, and you can actually hear them say, there's a plane flying overhead. Do you want to get it out? And you can hear somebody else say, no, leave it. And I love that. Leave it in there. Leave that error. Leave that little detail, that little artifact in there, because that can be pretty fun to look at. And maybe it could become part of your signature, is having those little artifacts floating around in there. Now, for me, with this drawing that I'm working on, doing the pen and ink work, that's my favorite part. I love doing pen and ink. I love putting in all the little details. You know, you come up with your scenario, you come up with your character, you present it as that, and there's your voice. And with color, adding color to it can always be a challenge, because I try to create a color palette that I'm going to use. I try not to deviate from it, but sometimes you have to. And as fun as it is, I sometimes just prefer the drawing without the color. So sometimes I'll color it digitally, sometimes I'll color it with watercolors, sometimes markers, sometimes pen and ink, whatever. But for me, I try to appreciate the drawing from start to finish. And sometimes the finish doesn't live up to my expectations. And I'm sure you go through the same thing, where you finally finish a piece and you're kind of like, this isn't what I wanted. But my recommendation in that case is take the piece, put it away, put it in your portfolio case, put it in your sketchbook, do something with it and get it out of sight. Leave it alone. Because what's happening is you're working too closely with it. You're working too upfront and in the face of that piece. And it's too hard to appreciate the piece that close up. So what I recommend is taking it and putting it away for a while. And it could be a day, it could be, a couple of weeks, it could be anything. But I've learned over time that when I pull that piece out later, especially the longer I've been away from it, and I pull it out later, I realize how much more in awe of it I am, because I realize, wow, I actually did put a lot of time and thought into this piece. This was not a quick piece. This was something I poured a lot of time into, and I really misjudged this piece, because at the time I kind of was sick of it. I didn't like it, or it wasn't where I wanted it to be. Looking at it later, you can actually see it and say, this was actually not too bad. And you might want to pull it out, maybe work on it a little more, add some things, use multimedia, and then it will emerge as a different piece. And again, that goes back to using your own work as a reference. If you take a piece and put it away and you forget about it, and maybe you do other work on the side, other pieces, but then you come back to that piece again, you can use your own piece as a reference for itself, and then try new things from there. So again, just to recap, number 1, practice, practice, practice. Number 2, experiment and try new things. Number 3, review the artists you admire most. 4, use your own work as a reference. Number 5, read, watch, and listen to websites, social media channels, podcasts, videos, all that stuff. Number 6, look for your style and realize that you're going to experiment and practice, and you'll eventually develop a style that will grow out of all that work. Number 7, don't be afraid to change directions. Number 8, remember it's the process, not the final result. Number 9, try to mimic other artists. Use their work to create your own work from the influence of their stuff. And that's, again, that's a really fun thing to do. It's not easy to get into, but once you can get into it, it's actually a lot of fun. And number 10, appreciate the work you create, because it's your work, it's your time, it's your creativity, it's your creative spirit, and you're pouring it into these drawings, paintings, whatever it is, sculptures, whatever it is you do. You're putting your creative energy into these pieces, and if we don't appreciate the work we do, then we don't like it. And that's the thing, is that we don't appreciate it. We're not going to respect it. We're just going to either toss it away or toss it in a portfolio case or a sketchbook, whatever, and just never look at it again. And that's not what we want. We want to really appreciate and love the work we create. So, you know, I can't say it enough. It's important to always respect our work, respect the process, and don't be afraid to ask questions either. That's another thing I should mention is it's okay to reach out to the social media artist that you really like, even if they have 129,000 followers and you're just somebody following them. If you ask them a question, I guarantee you they will respond. Most artists are more than happy to respond, especially if it's a good, solid question. I get questions all the time, whether it's on my Instagram, not so much Facebook because that's more my personal stuff, but on Instagram, I get a lot of questions. With YouTube, people find my email address and email me, and I get a lot of questions that way. And a lot of questions also come in the comment section down below. So in closing, all I'm going to say is that you have a great voice. You may not know it though. And finding that voice is just a matter of time and putting yourself to work. Nothing ever got done from not doing anything. So if you don't do anything, if you're inactive, you're not going to have any results. So obviously, you love to draw, you love to be creative, so get to work, get busy right now. You know, this is a long video. And if you're sitting through this, I hope you're sitting there drawing. I hope you're not just sitting listening and watching this video, but I hope you're drawing right now. I hope you're being creative right now, because that's the point of this kind of video is I can talk through this stuff and you can listen and you can work at the same time. And that's what I do when I watch other people's videos. I'm usually drawing or doing something. And that's pretty much all I have to say on this topic, but it's a very difficult thing to try to find a voice if you don't know what you're listening for. So listen closely. Your voice is there. It's like that husky puppy. You just got to kind of keep practicing before you howl. And once you find your howl, you're going to be howling all the time and you're going to be loving it. So thank you so much again for coming by today. I hope this was helpful. I hope it was a meaningful conversation. I really enjoy this kind of content and would love to bring you more like this. So please subscribe, and hopefully you're doing something creative right now and you're kind of listening to your own voice. And I know I have my own voice, and my voice is sort of running out right now because I'm just getting over a cold, and hopefully I'll feel better soon and create more artwork. Anyway, thank you so much for coming by. Take care of yourself, and as always, God bless.